So, hi everyone, I am Aleix. I have been working or trying to apply DDD during my last 4 years, some in consultancy, some in product, worked better in product, but I will try to share how I apply DDD in a consultancy firm as well. So, that's me, very fast. So, a special thanks to the community and Marco for hosting the event. So, let's start. Easy to simplify, not too complicated. So if you want to have a team onboarding in your company and you're not applying, I will try to focus on the simple things to onboard your, let's say, team in DD. So 4 questions. How many of you are developers? Perfect. How many of you are from the business side? Perfect. And how many of you are applying DD in your company? Good, you will report, but don't worry. So maybe you have experience when you try to onboard your team in DD, you have to explain a lot of things and you end up doing something like this. You know, the experience of trying to explain TQRS, sourcing, a lot of stuff at once. Okay, let's simplify this to not end up in this way. So what is DD about? DD is about focusing on the business and the knowledge. So instead of just going through the technical things, DD is from the business side. So it starts there and then goes down. So you have to keep this in mind during this talk. So and 2 main things to have in mind: bounded context and ubiquitous language. Who don't understand bounded context? Okay. And ubiquitous language? Let's say bounded context for you is basically you say, this is a limit of these concepts in my domain business, and if you are, for example, in the bounded context of cars, and someone comes and say, okay, I want to do something about pictures, maybe it doesn't fit in the bounded context. So it's a way to say what belongs to here and not, very briefly. And ubiquitous languages is just a way to talk. The worst thing about ubiquitous languages as a Spanish people is pronounce it. That's all. Okay? So, very briefly, I will go from strategic to tactical. Why? Is because the strategic patterns is what influence more your organization. So it's more about top-down. So if you're in a position of decision maker or leadership, you are better. You can take better decisions and influence the organization. Meanwhile, if you're a developer, it's very hard you to take influence. So you focus more in this area. In any case, know how to apply them is very good if you are in a situation where you have to share or some decisions with your executive team or leadership team. So let's start by strategic patterns. This familiar to you? I guess yes. So let's say, because most of you are developers, this is a way, if you are the decision makers, to organize people. So one where we fits well is how you organize future teams. So this is a tool that helps you. But if you're not a decision maker and you cannot change how your company is organized, if you are an architect, it helps you if you, for example, you're using microservices architecture to say, okay, which is the size of my service, which is how many microservices should I have. These patterns helps you to determine objectively which and how many and the size of the microservices. It's one tool. If it works for you, at least works for me. So this is from implementing to manage design. Let's question, how many of you have read the Red Book? How many of you have understand this book? Me not. It's very hard. Okay, it's very deep. There is a lot of concepts in one book, and it takes a lot to understand them all. So don't worry, we're here to simplify things. So what happens if, for example, my organization doesn't have a future team and is like department-based? What happens? Because remember, we are here to centralize knowledge. So in department-based, it's very hard to keep all this knowledge going through all departments. It's very hard. It works better with organized teams, future organized organization. But if you're here, just try to apply the same things in your team. It works. It works well. Not better than this situation, but you should try. This is just an example. Maybe it's with the thing. Okay, future-based organization. Let's focus on bounded context helps to organizing future teams. I have seen quite a lot that this is the other way around. So you have a team already and then you say, okay, this is my bounded context. No, It doesn't work in that way. It's like you define your business, and then you say, okay, this is my branding context, then I have to put there the team, not the other way around. So again, if you're a leadership decision maker position, use these tools to organize your teams in to be more focused. So, domain expert. How many of you have heard about domain expert? Okay. How many of you know one domain expert? Cool. So the first thing that it's very hard to know is who is your domain expert and how you identify it, because most of you may think, or at least when I started, is that it should the business side. Okay, can be different thing. So it can be a product owner, or maybe it's your developer with more experience. So the domain expert can be different people, and because this is not like a title on LinkedIn saying I am a domain expert, but let's say identify in your team which is the guy or girl that has more knowledge, and then try to start talking with this guy or girl. Why? Because if you don't apply these conversations with your domain expert, you have two different mindsets. You have the technical mindset, thinking about DDD, TD, blaming JavaScript, I don't know, and maybe you have later your business with different things. So you don't talk the same language. So what you have to do is talk with the same. You to your business, not the other way around. So you have to adapt your language to the business side. That's the most important thing. And here, just try this to create this language, share language. Don't try to explain what it is, just create it, right? So it looks more natural. So, but okay, let's find some tools that you maybe want to apply. User stories and specification really helps in the long run. So if you're creating and modeling and say, okay, what is this concept, and you are like working all the day. But you have quick wins to discover and trying to build this ubiquitous language, which is evidence storming and domain storytelling. So you have tools, but don't know, you have more than one. So if one fails, try another. And if you're in the technical side, after you have done this work with your business side, apply. If you are in the same room, pair programming. If you are in remote work, then code review helps. So you have tools. So, in summary, business people and technical people have to talk. Just please talk with business people, your domain expert, and create this shared language. So, and as well, use that language in your code. It's very important. And don't be afraid, you have to talk a lot, because if you are for example, in healthcare, it's a nightmare for a developer. So you have to talk often, a lot, and ask more and more and more. If you're in a simple domain, maybe you don't need DDD. But if you're here, it's because you have something that is very hard for you to understand and apply. And you need to simplify all the things and all these concepts. And that's why you have to ask a lot to your domain expert. So this should be familiar to you if you apply DDD. So I don't know if you have been like trying to choose one meaningful variable name and you start there like for 10 minutes, like what the hell is this, the better name? And this is like a joke that I found that is like, if you are trained like a designer, people say, okay, but that variable can be Q, well, maybe P pops more, I don't know. This should happen in your team. If you're developing something and you have these discussions about which name is more meaningful to you, you are not doing this work to apply your biggest language in your team. So these are two jokes, but it really reflects what happens when you start applying DDD. And this web is just word reference. It's nothing about, I don't know if you say in the bottom, but this word reference link, which is basically synonyms. If you're a Spanish speaker, maybe you need more words in English, so it's a very tool if you are not a native English speaker. So a reflection. When you finish this talk, well, tomorrow, let's think about how you model the absence of something. You're using nulls, for example. Business doesn't use the null in any conversation. How you model the absence of something in your model, in your domain model. It's very curious how you find some tools that maybe you're not aware, but try to do one step and say how we can fit more with the business language. So next, I will post a link on this slide so you will have this later. These 4 books really helps to create and help and bootstrap if you don't know how to start. I would say start by this one, follow this, and if you want to be really, you're in a more business side position, these two, okay? It really helps. And 2 video recommendations from DD Europe, which are readable code. It talks about this ubiquitous language and how she applies it. And then, lucky me, this just was a lot today, is about combining DD and BDD. So just try to start with these 2 videos. It's just 30 minutes long, or maybe 1 hour. It's very fast. So maybe start here and then choose this. So tactical patterns. Okay, we are here. And do you mean that if I don't do the strategy patterns well, it will fail? No. Maybe you fail. You don't have a storming because you are not allowed to for whatever reason. This means that you cannot apply DD. Wrong. You can't do it. Just try to find your, let's say, tool that it fits more. Okay. So my recommendation, if you want to start with your team, don't try to put CRS and event sourcing just from scratch, because people needs a while to understand the concepts. So starting by value objects and entities, it's more than enough to start doing, because here you will start using these meaningful names and methods and so on. So this is a good step forward, and it takes a lot. It's not like 1 month, it takes time. So focusing these 2 main tactical patterns if your company doesn't use DD today. So first example. I will go very fast, but how many of you have been familiar with this crude, very simple domain that end up having a lot of business logic in the controller, let's say controller architecture, okay? So maybe you are familiar with, this is called link, but it's very easy to read. So maybe you start saying, no, this is very simple, just do a simple CRUD, and then you start doing, and then no, but then you have this case, if everywhere. So if you have this code, maybe DD with value objects and entities really helps you. So try to find if you have an dynamic model. If you have setters, you probably have an dynamic model. So try to reach how many of this logic is everywhere. And do the first thing of DD or calculation and so on, which is try to put everything as bottom-up in your domain as possible. And try to use DTOs to decouple and try to pass information. But remember, just move the business logic, not everything, to your entity. So it's a good step to say, okay, instead of having all the ifs there, you move everything to your entity, and then because here is like your entity is exposed to the end wall, you see here. So here is like, okay, you start doing things and say, okay, I don't want nulls, required is not null, and you start verification that the email is valid, for example. And you put everything here. You maybe find bugs, just leave this. It's good enough. And then you talk directly to the repository. Still is good enough. It's the first step, because in the process you will find something. So little steps, and you maybe introduce some technical debt, but it's okay. So next. What happens is that you should try to introduce a new concept when you're doing this, in this step, because you're near to your problem, which is the value objects. So the next natural, when people get the idea of value objects, they start using everywhere because they are very useful. So entities and value objects just brings enough concepts to your team, and it brings enough value at the beginning. So they are in the table, there are some difference that I will share you later in the book that explains it better. So, but then you will find a problem, which is they say, okay, you need ports and adapters, and then you say, okay, I cannot change everything. You cannot change everything. Choose DB coupling over UI coupling. So this is my recommendation of, don't try to do database migrations. Controller is easier, so you can be done in that code. So choose, if you can not decouple of everything, choose DB over front-end returning. So, and here you will find something like in the steps, you will say, hey team, do you see that maybe this value objects, which is an email, maybe it's the ID, and then you start introducing this value object as an ID. Then people start getting the idea. And here probably you have another thing that you will say, okay, age, an integer, maybe it's not, because an age always have to be greater than 0. You can model this as an if. In the constructor, maybe it's a value object of age that with logic. It's a way to start like thinking and trying to put value objects everywhere, because the logic is very easy to distribute and handle in the good place. Later, I would say, okay, you have active record, it's very hard, but if you have repository pattern in your application, you're lucky. And basically have this application service, which is basically very simple. If you have here logic in your application service or service in general, you can say, very simple, I fetch something from my repository, I apply some domain model method and then save, maybe send an email or whatever, and then return video. So just doing this, you are like focusing everything down. And if you start knowing that when you go through a one application service and it's just have, get something from database, apply a method, save, maybe return something, your unit test will heavily go better. Because this is, it's a nightmare when you have too much side effects, smoking. It really, really helps. And if you have this application service in your team and people use it well, it really helps in the reducing and putting everything more stronger in your domain. So this was a recommendation about, hey, put an example that maybe instead of being just a generic domain, be maybe something with meaningful data or meaningful business behavior. So, and how you can start doing all this stuff. So let's say, okay, let's model a YouTube playlist somehow. Maybe the email playlist more similar. So basically, when you say you have here some requirement in when you create something, have logic in your constructor is very, very powerful. It's just if you know if this is here, this entity is valid. If not, maybe it's very, very helps. So, and the main thing here is request visualization, which it means it should have here something like a user story. But let's imagine that it's something like, depending on the playlist type, you have to request access to or not. So if it's a public, you get the video. If it's not public, you maybe have to be in the membership member. Oh, this is it's okay. Member set. So basically, what it says is find the video inside the playlist and find, first of all, find it. If it's not null, then say, okay, permission rejected because it doesn't work. Video on phone exception or whatever. But if it's, for example, this private, I just guarantee the permission. Click. This visualization permission guaranteed. Maybe you can find this in your user story. So you are like using it. And what it returns is it contains the video inside. So it's like, if you have this in guaranteed, then if you ask, you have the video. If not, you throw an exception. It's a way to model, right? So, and if it's private, what you need is like members should contain the user requesting, you know? It's like, it's not like user, it's user request. Just a variable name, but it really helps you to know what is this user. As the user requesting to view this video, it helps you to know. And if it's not, just reject with some exception. I use these words because maybe you have some classes that helps you, like an either, but just wanted to have the business logic, the business language here instead of using either optionals and so on. So it's a way to say, okay, I'm expressing myself here. So my recommendation, just get rid of all setters the next day. Yeah. But it's like, okay, move everything as in methods and choosing a meaningful names when you do something in the next time, because it will really help. And try to use these meaningful names that belongs to the business side, like this ubiquitous language, and use the test mode adds further. But be careful when you do this, because if you start trying to change all the data fields that maybe persist to database, it's like you don't want to start having this fight. So if you have to change the getter name and then the field is mapped as before, it's okay. You want to start using this name, and you don't want to start doing a huge refactor. So that's my recommendation. do not change names when it maps to database. So move logic and invariance to use the main model. Start doing and moving everything down. It just from control as down as possible. Maybe you're doing REST, but this is, if you're doing DED, maybe this helps you to start putting the team there. Well, the controllers, application service doing this proxy between repository and entity method calls. Yeah, if you cannot isolate it by both, like this port and adapters architecture, just choose recoupled to database. Meanwhile, until you can decouple for database. And well, use DTOs. DTOs really helps in this refactor way, new way to run. I'm very sorry, I will share the screens later. Yeah, and please, this has to be iterative. So just don't try to do everything tomorrow. Get one user story and see how you can refactor this code meanwhile. So you know where to finish, because where to finish is what the business side tells you. So where to stop? When business side say, I need this, then you have in the acceptance criteria definition of done. This is the finish step. So, but remember, not all logic is business, so don't move everything to business to the main, because it's not. Try to not be too much influenced by business, by the database, ORM, and so on. But if you have introduced this technical debt, just try to remove it as soon as possible. But if it's not possible, just be aware. If you are aware of your technical debt, it's a tool that you can use. And security. Security often doesn't belong only to the domain layer. It's something which is standard, so don't try tomorrow to change all the securities. Need to be in every layer. So security is another topic, and don't be afraid if you have to say, okay, I cannot do this pattern because of this security. It's okay. So don't worry this. So summary. If you start having something similar to this, you started doing DD. So let's say this is a small, because this layer has to be small. Domain is, okay, domain during design, right? Domain. Everything else is just input and output thing. So if you can put all the business logic there, you are applying DD in a good way, in my opinion, and with meaningful names, then okay, you're succeeding. The thing should be a good onboarding for your team when you start doing DD there, I hope. So one recommendation, if you want to find this entity, value object, immutability, one book, this one. Red book, too much. This one for your team, it's good enough. It really helps you to get more robustness in your domain model. So to finish, I will say, first of all, identify how is your organization. If you don't know how it is organized, you cannot apply strategic or something similar. So be aware how is it and choose wisely. Experiment. It's not something like I do event storming and I expect this result. This doesn't work in that way. Just try to iterate. Learn and share your experience with your teammates, otherwise you will lose. Remember, this is about sharing the knowledge of business and as well of technical. So spend time talking with your team. Not too much, but yeah, enough time. And iterate your domain. If you want to try to define your main bounded context, subdomains, using this, using that, with one iteration, no. Just try to know where to stop using this business definition and putting you a goal, which is mainly, I move this to an entity, this maybe is a goal. I want to introduce that value object, it's enough. Just try to put, because it takes time to onboard all your teammates. Okay. Thank you. I will post the link in the meetup for you for having the slides and all the links and so on. And I had this example, I did a repository, but I have to iterate a little more. So questions and answers. More questions than answers, I hope.
What do you mean when you say when you have to choose that decoupling from DB and UI?
Yeah. Okay, here you are a DD, like you see this and you are like hurting your eyes. Like, okay, how could be that my entity have this? right? So this is like a nightmare if you want to apply hexagonal architecture. This means that you are mapping this entity directly to your persistent layer. So this, for example, is because I was introducing too many things, and if I don't want to do another iteration because maybe it's too long, I choose this one over be coupled to the return, for example. So that's why I mean choosing, if you have to choose, because choosing data which is persistent takes longer, it's more harder, just choose another fight. So that's why I say, you want to people learn, don't fight between migrations and so on. That's my recommendation. If you can avoid having this in your domain model, better. Okay. I hope you, yeah.
Okay, if you have to decide, when you structure an application like this, yeah, like for example, yeah, you have to decide whether you put a database layer and on top a service layer and a controller layer, or the alternative would be to make like feature packages that contain the entity and the service and the controller.
Okay, you mean the directory structure?
More, yeah, in Java the packages or
okay, I would say this example was done doing controller model repository service because I wanted to help the next guy to identify very fast, because otherwise you see domain infrastructure.
Yeah.
So it's very hard. So the optimal would be domain infrastructure, let's say, and then instead you have this mapping between HTTP and database. But because when you want to onboard people, just don't try to move too much things slowly.
But if you were to start from scratch, for example?
Probably domain
infrastructure,
maybe another.
And inside domain, every feature or every entity, every aggregate root or
yeah, entity is everything which is domain based there. Yeah,
in different separate packages.
Yeah, it's like okay, for example, domain. Then you have the domain, the business on the context of cars or PC, and then
you would have like the database definition inside the in the infrastructure.
See, then you have there a mapper between your entity and your database. So it's depending on how you want to persist, right? So if you want to persist to database, or maybe you want to throw this to a queue. So that's a facade in the infrastructure layer.
I have a question, because you say in the model objects it's more it's very visible. No, the second one. Very visible.
Let's start again.
The second point.
The second point is very reusable.
Reusable in terms of the pattern, right? It's very easy to understand what is about. Try to identify and put the logic there. It's like replace a variable type of string by a new of this one object. It's very, you know.
We have
It's just a validator that we put in the constructor of the email class, right?
Yeah, here is just a logic of email, and then you have just this logic about how to validate this, but I think it's not your question.
No, my question is we have two entities like company and like customer, and we'll have name from company or name from customer. You say use the same value object?
Depending. Is the same bounded context?
Well, I don't know.
That's
it's an example.
yeah, that's why, for example, if you that's a very good question, because it brings to the table one important thing, which is the wrong abstraction. So if you are one context which is companies and the other is customers, and you find that you here using name and here using name, it means different things, right? Here maybe you have to end by SL, and here is just you need three things. They have different behavior, but using the same name. So depending on the bounded context, are two different things. If you're not using DD, maybe you wrongly put the same abstraction of the bonds, different things in the same value object. So I would say, if you have different bounded contexts, they are different things. Right? They are not reusable. I would say better reusable strategic pattern. Okay, thank you for pointing that.
you recommend the use of GraphQL? I know it has to be technology agnostic, but
GraphQL, it's like throwing everything to the outside. It's very like, you will, it's hard. Everything from paper? No, it's not. Okay, sorry. Depending on your needs, it's not.
Depends on the action, right, that you're requesting.
but it provides
Yeah.
decoupling from the front end.
Sorry?
It provides the decoupling from the front end, right?
It's hard. It's very
It's
hard to
not
say
that
use
easy.
this or you not use this. It's depending. If you want to fight this, then yes. But maybe you're creating another problem, which is you probably are. So depending on your, it's like if you want to do something fast and you are comfortable and you're familiar with this tool, then yes. But be aware of the counterparts when you're using, right? Because where you put the logic with GraphQL, you
Means
throw
that-
all the database.
Yeah, you have to like have services, like
It takes a lot. That's mine.
Well, in my case, I'm working in a project for 2 months now. We are coding everything in TypeScript and Node.js in backend. So we started like the common MVC, and then we started decoupling a few things as a service. So we just create like a new folder, and then everything that's related with validations and things that we need to manage, like business logic itself, that not belongs to the module, we put there. And now we are creating it's just like a folder, we call like repository, but it's basically how we are pasting, a pure object, JavaScript object, and then we are sending to Postgre database. But essentially, we are just following up interface implementation to get star, etc. And this is a good approach to follow, or not exactly.
I will try to find, because it's very hard to me to say yes or no. Is your team is familiar with this approach? You know where to go later? Because it's very hard. Later, if you want, we can talk, because I cannot give you an advice. An advice now will be worse than me thinking about it. So, sorry, later. Okay. And one thing very fast. Do you see this? This is exclamation marks, because like this shouldn't be in your domain model. And create from DTO, it's another technical step. You should be here something like, the next step could be a command creating the entity. So, because if you will have here a lot of things about creating from DTOs, it's bad. So it's a technical debt to concentrate things, and when you are able to move this into a command, for example, better. So just say these and these are technical debt. That's just one point.
But if you are not using CQRS, you still do the
No, it's not command. It's not from the queue. Only from CQRS. Okay. It's just let's say it's an object which is basically a facade, which it's a function of you give me a DTO, I give you an entity, and you are not here because it's noise, right? So you'd say like I gave a function of I receive a DTO and I give you an entity. That's me. And it's not from just CQRS when you say command.